Hello and welcome to this presentation for Pitkin County Senior Services. My name is TJ Dazash, and today I would like to share with you the story of Kasa Jizō. Some of you may have tuned in October for our Halloween story, Miminashi Hoichi, and this story will be a continuation in that same way of thought. Before we get too deeply into our story today, it's important that we explore some of the context for how this story might fit into Japanese culture and just get a basic idea of some of the terminology that will be used. First of all, the title is Kasa Jizō, Jizō with the hat. Now, Jizō is a bodhisattva, sort of like a Buddhist saint, and he's deeply loved by the people of Japan. So that's where we'll start our discussion. What is a bodhisattva? We can think of a bodhisattva as being a sort of a model for how a person should live if they want to achieve enlightenment. It might be helpful to go back and look at the lecture that we did on Buddhism, and you'll find some information there about bodhisattvas. But for the purposes of our story today, I'll just say that a bodhisattva is a person who is slated to become a Buddha. They are on the verge of achieving full and total enlightenment themselves. The word bodhisattva means enlightenment being. And what makes the bodhisattva special is that they've taken a very special vow. They vow that when they achieve enlightenment, they will not leave the world, they will not enter into the peace and tranquility of nirvana. Instead, they choose to stay in the world of suffering, this world in which we live, called samsara, and they will help all beings to achieve their own liberation from samsara. So the bodhisattva makes a vow that upon achieving full realization or full enlightenment, instead of embracing their own personal liberation, they will stay behind and work towards the liberation of every other sentient being in the world. In order to do this, the bodhisattvas train in three particular disciplines. They develop compassion, they develop wisdom, and they develop something that in Buddhism is called skillful means. Compassion, we could simply say, is that they become deeply sympathetic and empathetic to the suffering of other beings. Wisdom is the ability to see the world just as it truly is. And in the Buddhist context, that has many implications. Again, it might be useful to go back and look at our previous lecture on Buddhism. Skillful means is the activity that a bodhisattva engages in when they have fully developed their wisdom and compassion. So skillful means really is the activity of a being who has developed full wisdom about the world and who sees all beings with the eyes of compassion. The character Jizō that we will hear about in our story today is one of these bodhisattvas. As I said, his Sanskrit name is Kshitigarbha, and it means earth womb or earth treasury. In Japanese, his name is Jizō, and he is viewed as being very, very important in Japanese Buddhism. He watches over travelers and children, and he also watches over the dead. If you go to Japan, you'll very likely see statues of Jizō along roadsides. You'll see a small statue of Jizō at many major intersections. All this because he especially is concerned about people who are traveling. We see that people who are traveling are always in a state of movement, always moving from one point in reality to another. And this relates to his particular association with being a protector or a guardian of those who have passed on as well, because he helps people travel between lifetimes and between the world of the living and the world of the dead. Usually in Japan, he's depicted as a monk. He has a shaved head and usually carries a staff that's associated with Buddhist monks. And oftentimes he'll have a special jewel that he carries in one hand, and this jewel grants all wishes. It's also said that Jizō saves beings in all the 6 realms of existence. There's an idea in Buddhism that a person, upon their death, could be reborn in one of 6 places. They could be reborn in the realm of the gods. They could be reborn in the realm of demigods, where there is constant competition. They could be reborn as a human being once again. They could be reborn as an animal. They could be reborn as a hungry ghost, where craving dictates every part of their existence. Or they could be reborn in a hell realm. Regardless of where a person is reborn in the Buddhist worldview, each of those states of existence is temporary. Being reborn as a god, you might live your life as a deity for hundreds of thousands of years, but eventually that lifetime also will end, and you'll be forced to take on another reincarnation. Similarly, you may end up in a hell realm for thousands of years if your crimes against humanity are great enough. But eventually you work off the negative karma associated with the hell realm, and you're able to take a rebirth in a higher realm of existence. So it's said that Jizō watches over people in all 6 realms and helps people when they're traveling between those 6 realms. And this is important for our story today because we're going to see 6 Jizō statues mentioned in our story. In this picture that I've found, or these 2 pictures that I've found rather, you can see 6 little statues of Jizō lined up side by side. And this is something you see often in Japan. 6 Jizōs representing the 6 realms of existence. You might notice in these pictures that each of the Jizōs is holding a different object in his hands. This references which realm he is particularly associated with. The idea is that a bodhisattva, because of their great spiritual development, can enter into any one of the 6 realms and help the sentient beings that he finds or she finds there. So Jizō is sort of like a big brother who steps into each of these places where beings are suffering and tries to help them out of their suffering situation. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of context for our story today and gives you a sense, even a very small sense, of who this Bodhisattva Jizō really might be. So now, I would like to begin with our story for today, the story of Kasa Jizō. Long, long ago, in a distant place far up in the mountains, lived an old man with his wife. They were very, very poor, but they didn't mind it so much. They lived simply, and they were happy living in harmony with their environment. They made a living by weaving straw into rice bags and sandals, which the old man carried to nearby villages to sell. One cold day, the day before the New Year's celebrations were set to begin, the old man gathered all the bags and all the sandals they had made, the work of an entire month, and he packed them on his back. Starting his long journey down from the mountain, he said to his wife, "If I sell all of these, I'm sure I can buy enough rice for us to make rice cakes for the new year. We will have a proper New Year's celebration this year." Though it had started to snow quite heavily, the old man's kind wife couldn't convince her husband not to go. As she watched him disappear down the mountain, she prayed that the snow would not get any worse, and that he would find his way back home safe and sound. On his way down the mountain, the old man passed in front of 6 statues of the Bodhisattva Jizō, standing silently on the roadside, watching over the passing travelers. He stopped and bowed to each of them in turn. Then he looked up at them and said, "Excuse me for having to pass in front of you. You must be very cold in this heavy snow." Saying this, he brushed away the piles of snow that covered each of their bald heads. Then he continued on his journey. Arriving at the village, the old man couldn't shake off the image of the 6 Jizōs. Oh, they must be shivering. It's so cold outside. Those poor, poor fellows, he thought to himself. So he sold all the bags and all the sandals he had brought with him, and he realized that the money he had was just enough to buy 5 bamboo hats called Kasa for the Jizōs. With his newly purchased hats in hand, he hurried back home happily through the snow. Arriving at the Jizōs, he brushed away the snow again, and one by one placed the hats on their bald heads. When he got to the 6th Jizō, he hesitated. His meager earnings had only been enough to buy 5 bamboo hats. Slowly, he took off the piece of cloth he wore around his own head and covered the head of the 6th Jizō with it, tying it under the Jizō's chin. Then he continued on his way home. Arriving home, his wife came to meet him at the door, smiling happily. "Let's get started making the rice cakes," she said happily. "It's New Year's Eve." "Ah, but my dear wife," the old man said, "please forgive me. I didn't buy the rice." "No rice?" she said. "But how can we spend New Year without rice cakes?" So the old man told her about the Jizōs who were standing all alone in the snow, and about the snow piling up on their bald, freezing heads. "I'm so sorry," he said to his wife, "but we have our house to keep us warm and comfortable in this weather. Those Jizōs have nothing to protect them from the snow. They can only stand there silently as the snow falls all around them." His wife listened patiently to all he said. "Well, if that's the reason, then I'm proud of you," she said. "And surely we won't die without rice cakes on New Year's Day. A porridge will do just fine for the 2 of us. We can at least do the ritual of rice cake pounding, even though we don't have rice. We can pretend there is rice in the dough and pound it, just as if we were making rice cakes." So they made dough, and they started to pound it, making a clattering sound like everyone does on New Year's Eve. Then they had their porridge, and satisfied, they went to bed. Somewhere around midnight they were awakened by a strange sound in the snow. It was like something heavy being dragged along on the ground, and they thought they heard voices being carried on the wind. The old man woke up and said to his wife, "Do you hear something?" His wife opened her eyes. "It's midnight. What could it be but the wind and the falling snow?" They strained their ears, listening to the night sounds, and floating on the wind, they heard voices chanting, "Up there is the house of the man. Up there is the man who gave us hats. Up there is the man who gave us his treasure." The chanting went on, and as it grew louder, followed by the sound of snow crunching underfoot, wide awake the old man and his wife hurried to their front door and were shocked by what they saw. 5 Jizōs, each wearing bamboo hats, and a 6th wearing the old man's scarf, walked in 2 rows of 3, carrying a big straw bag between them. They walked straight to the house and placed the heavy bag carefully on the porch. Then they turned back, returning to their place by the road, where they stood quietly, protecting travelers who passed by. When all 6 had returned to their standing positions, only then did they stop their sing-song chant. When everything was quiet again, the old man and his wife quickly ran outside. Lifting the bag, they carried it into the house, wondering what it could be. To their amazement, when they opened the bag, they found that it was full of rice, enough for the rest of their lives. The old man hugged his wife, tears running down both of their faces. This was the most wonderful New Year they had ever known. They smiled at one another and laughed and hugged again. Outside, just a little way down the mountain, the 6 Jizōs stood steadfast and peaceful in the snow.